Hello and welcome to the first episode of Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland's new podcast, Criminal Justice Inspection Unpacked. I'm Melanie McVeigh from Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland, and over the coming episodes, I will be exploring the work of Criminal Justice Inspection, what the organisation does and how it contributes to improving Northern Ireland's criminal justice system. We'll be looking at the findings of CJI inspection reports and through the conversations and discussions that we have, providing a behind-the-scenes look at what is involved in an inspection, how we carry out our work and what we're finding. I'm delighted to be joined in Belfast today for this very first conversation by three guests who have been working closely together for some months on a unique piece of work, a pilot joint inspection of child protection arrangements in one health and social care trust area in Northern Ireland. My guests today are Roisin Devlin, Inspector with CJI, Shirley Jones, an Inspector with the Education and Training Inspectorate, and last but not least, Suzanne Cunningham, Assistant Director of Children's Services with the Regulation and Quality Improvement Authority, who are responsible for monitoring and inspecting the health and social care services in Northern Ireland. So firstly, welcome ladies to the Criminal Justice Inspection podcast. Before we get into the work you've been personally involved in, can I ask you, how do you feel about being the first guest here today? Are we all happy to be involved, or are we a wee bit nervous?
A bit nervous, but happy.
Suzanne, what about yourself? Have you done podcasts before?
I've done one podcast before, but I'm definitely nervous about this one. But it's really important to help people understand what we've done. So despite my fears, I am here.
And Shirley, what about yourself?
And likewise, I think it's really important that we talk about this piece of work, and particularly the way forward in working together collaboratively to protect and safeguard children.
Well, thank you very much, ladies, for coming along today and taking part in the conversation. Moving along, perhaps you can tell me a little bit about how did the idea for this joint inspection of child protection arrangements come about, Roisin?
Yes, well, back in 2020, Criminal Justice Inspection had looked at the response to child sexual exploitation. And during that, we had worked with His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue Services, what we refer to as HMIC. And we became aware of a mechanism that it was involved with in England, where joint child protection inspections had been undertaken there and routinely. We found that when we looked at the response to child sexual exploitation, it was really helpful to see how the criminal justice system responded. But as a criminal justice inspectorate, what we couldn't see was other aspects of the child's journey. So how had health and social care, how had education worked with criminal justice agencies to help the child. And so one of the recommendations that came out of that inspection report was for the Department of Justice to consider mechanisms for joint child protection inspection in Northern Ireland.
And that's where your partners come in here. So Shirley, can I ask you, from your perspective, why did you feel it was important to be working together in part of this project?
In the Education and Training Inspectorate, routinely in all of our inspection models, we look at safeguarding in the context of an individual, school or organisation. And when there are concerns about children or their at risk of harm, schools can't work alone, they have to work in partnership. And I thought this was a really good opportunity to look at how that partnership worked and what worked well, and perhaps what could be improved to help safeguard children better in the future.
And when you say safeguard children, what actually is that reality?
That is about where concerns have been identified perhaps through family circumstances, and where the school or the organisation need help to protect the child, promote their well-being and prevent further harm.
And from a health and social care perspective, Suzanne, what was your interest in this piece of work as well? Where were your thoughts?
I think it was just a really new way of inspecting that we had never been involved in before, even though we'd worked in partnership with ETI and with CJI on other inspections. This was about us each using our professional knowledge, our legislation and expertise in terms of how we inspect, why do we inspect, and what are we looking for, but really bringing that together to look at holistically what does a child's journey look like when they're being safeguarded or if they're in need of protection. So for us, that was really, really important, that it wasn't just another inspection. It was a new approach and a new way of doing it that really put the child at the centre of what we were doing. I think the other thing alongside that really sparked our interest was at the time that we were talking and planning this, there was a lot of media interest in child deaths and child being significantly harmed in England. And there was a lot of kind of discussion about that. What are we doing wrong? What do we need to do next? So we felt that this inspection really could help consolidate some of that thinking in terms of, right, well, what does need to happen next? So it wasn't just about working together. It was an opportunity to make a difference to children's lives.
Well, in terms of practical terms, we understand, definitely we get a sense that the child's very much at the heart of the work that has been done. It is about that improvement, but how did you do it? Your 3 different bodies, 3 different ways of working. What did this inspection actually involve? Maybe, Shirley, I'll come to you first.
Well, from the point of view of the Education and Training Inspectorate, it was very much working with the Education Authority, who had the responsibility for safeguarding across our education landscape, and looking also then at the work that the Education Authority does with individual schools in terms of the training, for example, through the Child Protection Support Service, which is an arm of the Education Authority, which is replicated across the province, and where groups of professionally trained social workers support schools on a day-to-day basis. So we did a survey, for example, of schools, post-primary schools in the Southern Trust area to gauge the views of staff. We visited 11 schools, or were engaged with 11 schools during the week of the inspection. And we engaged with staff from within the Education Authority. So that was new for us in terms of looking at the work of the Education Authority in terms of the impact and difference that it made with staff and schools.
So, Roisin, from a justice side, what was the benefits and what was this involving from your perspective?
Well, there was I think it's fair to say at the early stages, a lot of planning amongst ourselves initially to understand what it would involve, as well as engaging with different stakeholder organisations.
Was it difficult to get buy-in?
I would say everyone we spoke to was interested and bought into the idea of looking at the child's whole journey and how agencies have worked together to improve outcomes for children. And there was a lot of openness to doing this as a pilot inspection. From our point of view, we had to engage with criminal justice agencies, but at the same time there was a lot of learning about colleagues in other inspectorates and the types of engagements that they would be undertaking.
Suzanne, the focus on this piece of work was around the Southern Health and Social Care Trust. Was that just about practicalities, or is there anything else? Were they particularly open to taking part?
So I think we have to kind of maybe just think about the context that we were going out to do this inspection. And so at the time and still, social services and health are experiencing a lot of difficulties in terms of being able to deliver services of the quality that they would want to and that they aspire to do. So absolutely. And it really, we went out thinking we can't do any harm. We need to have an improvement focus. But by having that improvement focus and going out to do the inspection, we were very conscious about not doing any harm. So we really thought about who in terms of the trust maybe was robust enough and responsive enough and forward thinking enough to be able to address the level of input that we needed to be able to undertake this inspection. And that's not to say that the other trusts couldn't have done it themselves. But I think from our perspective, health and social care, we had really good relationships with the Southern Trust, and we felt that of all of them, that they were maybe in a slightly better position to be able to start this journey in terms of this pilot. So there was tentative discussions with them, but there was also, Roisin looked at the data as well. And data is really, really important when you're thinking about why are we going to do an inspection in a particular place. And the data was telling us that they had quite a lot of high numbers in relation to child protection investigations and maybe high numbers on the register. And also there was some kind of innovative thinking around different ways of working with children in that trust that perhaps then would be rolled out elsewhere. So it was a good opportunity to look at what impact was that having for children in relation to the child protection process. But it wasn't easy. We really had a lot of discussions about why do we need to choose a particular trust over another one. And I'm sure the Southern Trust, when we said to them, it's you, that they probably thought, oh my goodness, how are we going to address it? But they were brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
It does require additional pressure, additional commitment from staff, additional time, at a point where everyone still has their day-to-day jobs to be getting on with. So, but it's good to see people were open.
And it's not just, we didn't just choose that trust. We chose that education board and we chose that area in terms of criminal justice as well. So it was, I'm talking about the trust, but it was
across the whole, it was,
yes.
Because again, this was a collaborative piece looking across the justice, the education and the health sectors and seeing how those partnerships were working in reality. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. In this report that's been published, there's talk about protecting children at the front door. Perhaps, can you tell me what does that mean and why did you want to take that approach?
Well, the way inspection works in England, it had two different types of inspection. One was to look at the front door, which is where referrals and concerns about children come in through.
So an initial point of contact, that type of thing?
Services, yes. So in Northern Ireland, that would be social services gateway teams. But because we, as Criminal Justice Inspection, were leading on this pilot, and because we wanted to look at the multi-agency response and not the response perhaps of one agency acting alone, we considered referrals that had come in through the police front door, which is the police central referral unit. And having done that then enabled us to look back at how services had responded to initial concerns. The approach that we adopted was based on what we felt would be best for a pilot. And if we were to do this in future, we could be informed by what we had found in respect of that front door.
So I'm guessing there's a lot of learning that has been going on as you've been going through this work. It's not just learning for the inspected organisations that you were working alongside, but also learning for yourselves. So it's this point of referral. Who were you actually speaking to? Education authority, police, health and social care, anyone else in the area?
I think the thing with health and social care is it's a word that we kind of join together, but the expanse of what that means is probably not understood, which is it's every part of health that is involved with children and young people. And then you have social services alongside that. So you're really looking at two huge organizations in kind of one sentence. In England, that would be slightly different. So you would have your equivalent of CJI and ETI doing their job, and then you would have CQC and Ofsted, one doing health, one doing social services. So for us, I think we were a little bit scared because it was a big job, and I'm not a professional that goes out and does inspections in health usually. So we had to bring in specialist inspectors to do some of that as well. So it's, when you think about that front door and where do children come into that front door in need of child protection and safeguarding, it's a big picture that you're trying to inspect, and lots of different services and pockets of sub-services that are involved in that. So one of the things when we looked at the front door was we had to really funnel down, right, what does the front door mean for us, so that we could make sure each of our respective agencies that we were working with understood where the focus was going to be.
In terms of, the practicalities, what type of things can you maybe briefly tell me what type of things you were looking at? Were you speaking to people on the ground, or was it more paper-based examinations from each or from you?
Well, I suppose it was a joint inspection, and if you like, a joint inspection timetable, and that we each had different activities to undertake over the week. But that involved focus groups with different professionals working in policing, health and social care, schools, education authority was also involved. We also looked at the response to a small number of children, 5 children, and were able to follow the response of each of the agencies and how they had planned jointly to protect those children and young people. As well as that, we then undertook what is termed dip sampling. So we were then able to look at other types of cases that had been considered through police, health and social care again, to understand what types of measures have been put in place to protect children.
Okay, and what was the general sense of what you were finding when you were doing this work? Was it encouraging, or were there areas where you were picking up that there needed to be improvements made?
I think from the education perspective, the work demonstrated very clearly the important role that staff in schools play in keeping children safe, from their day-to-day contact with the children, and also in the effective responses when concerns were raised. So what we were seeing through the inspection was that in the Southern Trust, children are well safeguarded by educational professionals who are well trained and who are equipped with the necessary skills. So we were seeing prompt action being taken through the appropriate processes and referrals to gateway teams.
Anyone else? What were your findings around it, Suzanne?
I think for us, gateway seems to be the biggest front door of all of the agencies that we looked at. So for us, I think what we were really looking at, not surprised by, but I think it needs to be acknowledged, the complexity of the work and the variety of the referrals that were coming in through that front door, and that really those gateway teams were taking that kind of sole responsibility of trying to progress that child's journey to a point where they were either safeguarded or protected from immediate harm. And that was an enormous piece of work. So, people were talking about trying their best, and actually they were doing a really, really good job. You can't dispute, nobody did a bad job, but there was areas, as there always is, where you think, we could do this better, that this could have a better outcome for children, maybe if we stop and really think about what we're doing. So there was a lot of that discussion during the inspection with different professionals at all levels. We spoke to people on the front line answering the phones right up to the director, and they were all so committed to what they were doing, but did acknowledge that currently, especially post
COVID, the complexity is really difficult to try and respond to in the way that they wanted to respond to. So I think, in terms of a finding, it wasn't unexpected, but I think it was really difficult for us to see sometimes some of the frustration and the difficulties that they were facing. But the commitment of the staff couldn't be disputed in any of the agencies that we were speaking to.
What about the justice side of things, Roisin? Were there any particular findings or examples of good practice that you'd be highlighting?
We were seeing very clearly the dedication and commitment of officers, and that would include officers who were maybe first response. We did speak to a range of different officers in various roles. Youth diversion officers were also working every day with children and young people. And we had staff in the central referral unit, also committed and dedicated to ensuring a multi-agency response, and we found examples of really good practice. But I would echo what has been said, in that staff were at times working with a backlog, and we could see the stress involved in managing that. So it was really important that there was oversight, supervision and support for staff working across the agencies, and that there was quality assurance of the decisions that were being made. We found that at times, while there may have been a more detailed response, the detail of what was recorded and available on the case files was not always as fulsome as it could have been.
But overall, the sense was that organisations involved in this very critical role, they were keen to work together, and the personnel involved, regardless of whether they were in the justice, the health or social care sector or the education arena, they were all very much committed. There was a recognition of personal interest and responsibility, as well as that professional requirement as well.
Absolutely.
And so you're all from, unfortunately, or fortunately or unfortunately, from inspection or regulatory style bodies. So looking for improvements within your DNA, for want of a better word. What about improvements? What can be done better? What has this piece of work shown that we in Northern Ireland can be taking forward for children?
I think where we did see it, opportunities for different professionals to get together and understand how they work, their different referral processes, and what they needed in order to progress actions to protect children was really important. And so
were those professional networks maybe not as strong as they could be?
I think opportunities for multi-agency training and learning could definitely be enhanced, and that's something that would benefit.
So justice, health, education, everyone in the same room, getting the same understanding, having that shared approach.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think then that helps them to understand each other's roles and responsibilities. Do you know, I think it's difficult when you're so busy to say, yes, I'll accept this piece of work, when maybe it's not your role and responsibility, but the people that need to take it are actually overloaded with other work, and you realise, right, I can do something here. That joint working and joint training goes hand in hand, doesn't it? You start to realise, actually, we can do something here. It's maybe not strictly within our role and responsibility, but we still have a duty to the child, while social services or whoever it is maybe getting their evidence together to respond under their role and responsibility. So the joint working, I think we all agreed, could be improved. And it's not that they're not trying to do it at the minute. It's maybe just the systems that are in place don't promote it as much as they could.
So there's maybe a learning piece for organisational leaders around this as well, about how those connections could be made stronger, and more recognition of what is happening within other sectors at the same time. Yes.
In education, for example, the people who take a lead on safeguarding within schools are called designated teachers, and they are people who also have teaching responsibilities.
It's not their only role, is what you're saying, Shirley. They have a class to look after as well, or a subject to teach.
And one of the things that they would like is greater understanding that when, for example, social workers phone, that they're not always in an office available to take that call at that time. So it is about greater understanding of the complex roles that all of the individuals involved have.
The different responsibilities that everybody's juggling in respect of their own organisation that they're working for.
And I think as well, sharing information. So, for example, we talked about things like Unicini would be the universal referral form across agencies, and about, the expectations from education about what they need to put into that referral form so that the front door can be able to respond to it effectively. But sometimes you just don't have that information. So, sometimes there's a bit of tension where the social worker is saying, I need this information, and education saying, well, actually, we just don't have it. And it's about maybe that joint coming together and training and understanding each other's roles and responsibilities would increase that communication to a more effective level where it's not what we can't do, it's what we can do. And, just in terms of making referrals, I recently had to send a Unicini to a trust in relation to a child protection matter. And the trust came back to me and said, it wasn't a great Unicini. And I literally sat there thinking of what we were saying during the inspection. I don't have the information. I don't.
You've been on the fire. You've been on the
absolutely. I just was sitting there thinking, yes. Suddenly, you kind of realize that that's not a nice position, because you suddenly feel like you failed that child, and actually, we're not failing the children. But sometimes the system isn't responsive to what we can do rather than what we can't do.
Would you reflect the same experience from your views around the justice system? And the justice partners review?
Yeah, I think any opportunities that there are for the different professionals to come together and learn how each of them work is helpful, even within organisations. One of the things we did find was that within police service in the trust area, there wasn't always an awareness of the different parts of the police service working with the child.
So just the police, but in reality that could be broken down into a number of different parts,
different roles
and different people
within it, and it was important that was understood too, within that service, and then with the other agencies it was working with, and that was an area for improvement that we had identified.
Did you find that a lot of the networks, the relationships, those contacts, it was very much, individual or, personal connection led, or were there good actual practical policy and strategic or pieces there to help? Or is it a wee bit of a mix of both? And the personal connections just can't be underestimated either.
I think that the professional relationships were really good. I think working from a child protection perspective, when you look at the number of policies, procedures, guidance, legislation that they have to refer to on a daily basis across all of the agencies, it's not easy. When we pulled it together, looking at, what is the legislation and the guidance that staff have to look at on a daily basis that guides their work, it was a massive file that I pulled out and thought, I don't know that I could really refer to that on a daily basis practically. Now, you do have child protection policies that are excellent and do, I think, drive that multidisciplinary and multi-agency working, but on the ground sometimes I think it's not easy to put into practice. So those professional relationships are really, really important.
Some of the most effective examples of practice that we saw was where people had been in the roles for some time and they had been able to develop professional working relationships, and therefore that was effective because they did understand each other's roles, they understand the complexities of each other's roles, and therefore they were that wee bit more flexible in the way in which they worked with each other. So we also saw a really good example of a new policy development called Operation Compass, where the police are now sharing information very quickly with schools and other educational organisations when there has been a domestic abuse situation at home. And so, for example, during the week of the inspection in one of the schools that I was in, and this was the first week of the rollout of Operation Encompass in Southern Trust area. And we had an example where the school had received a call at 8 a.m. about 2 children who were involved in a situation, a domestic abuse situation at home. And by the time the children arrived at school at 8:45, the school had safeguards in place to help support and protect those children.
So that added information allowed the children, that school with those particular children to provide a more effective service, more effective support at that particular time when it was needed.
Absolutely.
In terms of this piece of work has very much been child focused, child protection, and it's about improvements. What are your hopes for the future, Roisin, about where this can go? What would you like to see happening next as a result of this particular piece of work?
Well, we were keen that the pilot looked at strengths as well as areas for improvement, and rather than set out a series of recommendations, what we have asked is that the agencies work together to put together a plan that will address the findings. I think I would be keen that the agencies can see the strengths and develop on those, but also find ways to work together to address the areas that we have identified for improvement, and hopefully see an opportunity to assess their response to cases and to children, and how that has worked in practice. So a self-assessment, if you like, of how they're doing and how they're helping children and young people. I think another hope for us is that we can present learning from this type of inspection. It was a pilot. There are a lot of areas of learning for us as inspectorates, but also an opportunity for us to present that learning to a central senior officials group, a child protection senior officials group, that is looking at options for this type of inspection to be developed as a more routine piece of work in the future.
Is it something you would collectively like to see rolled out to other parts of Northern Ireland?
I think we would. I think the difficult. Yeah, no. I think like anything, we have been resourced to do a certain number of pieces of work. This was an extra piece of work for us. It took a huge amount of hours out of other pieces of work that we needed to be involved in to really support CJI to get this inspection done and to get the outcomes done. And I can't over exaggerate how much CJI did to try and pull this inspection forward and to get the plans really well in place and embedded with everybody that was going to be involved in the inspection. So from our perspective, our involvement was much less, but it was still a lot to do. And I think if we're ever going to do these inspections, we need to do them properly, and that takes time to be able to plan properly, to be able to engage with people, to be able to really do the inspection from a multidisciplinary point of view from every inspectorate, and then for us to pull our findings together effectively. And I think the one piece that we haven't talked about, and we were so clear about this when we were planning, was the meaning of this inspection is about the children's journey. If they are in need of protection and safeguarding, that can be assured. The parents know, or the children know, that when they enter this system, that actually the outcome is going to be better for them as soon as they come into the system. So for us, I suppose in some ways, yes, it was a lot of work, but if we can get to that point where we can provide assurance that system is robust enough to respond to children's needs in Northern Ireland when they're in need of protection and safeguarding, then that's a really good job that we've done, and that everybody involved, including the agencies that we inspected involved, are doing. It's worthwhile, and it will have an impact then on our future adult population.
Shirley, what about you? The value, you see it? Would you consider doing it again? I suppose that's one of the key questions for everyone.
Well, I think we have to start off with thanking Roisin for her exemplary leadership and the amount of time and effort that she put into developing the model and supporting all of us through it. I think from my point of view, I would like to see in joint inspection work become a more regular model of inspection, because I think through it, the inspectorates can demonstrate clearly the effectiveness and impact of collaborative and cooperative working, and they in themselves are modelling that practice.
You're trying to be leaders through your own behaviours, not just do as I say, not as I do. Okay. And Roisin, what have you learned from the experience? We're hearing some very positive comments about what you've contributed and how you've kept this project underway.
I think it's just the huge benefit in working with colleagues in the other inspectorates. We can look at policing and other aspects of justice, but learning from the discipline and backgrounds of other colleagues was hugely beneficial, and most importantly allowed us to have a clearer view of the response to children that we considered. It was also a great opportunity to work with the organisations that we inspected, all of whom were very open to the pilot and committed time to make sure that it could work. I think the benefits of working together are really only something that we would want to replicate, and would agree with colleagues that if we can work collaboratively and demonstrate that to others, then when we ask that of them, I think we're in a better position too.
Okay, well, thank you, Shirley, Suzanne and Roisin, for joining us today and providing your insight and sharing, very frankly, your experience about this important joint pilot protection of child protection arrangements in the Southern Health and Social Care Trust area. If you would like to read the report, it's available to download from the CJI website. That's www.cjini.org. For me, it's time to sign off. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Criminal Justice Inspection Unpacked. With that, I'll be speaking to the CJI Chief Inspector Jackie Durkin and Chief Executive James Corrigan about the new corporate plan and the business and inspection programme for the 23-24 year. During that episode, we'll be diving into what CJI hopes to achieve over the next 3 financial years and unpacking the inspection themes that will be at the heart of what we will be doing to achieve a better justice system for all.